Okay, Chelsea versus Nottingham Forest. We are going to be tactically previewing the game, which will take place tomorrow. This is on Friday. We're going to upload the video today. Please support this video with as much likes, comments, subscribe if you haven't already, and also hype points. I don't really know much about them, but everybody keeps, when I watch other people's YouTube videos, that's what they're talking about. So if you have hype points and you can use them, why not help the video and help out the channel as we continue to try and grow the channel. We're trying to hit 10k by the end of this year, so that is the big aim. But in today's video, we're going to break down what Forest have been doing under Ange Postecoglou, how I think Chelsea could set up in probably two different ways in this game, which both have chances to exploit the weaknesses of this Ange Postecoglou side. So yes, we know that we've had a lot of injuries, and we're going to speak about those. We've got a few more injuries back on the block. Badiashile is now out, which I think is quite a big one. Also, just to quickly plug it, the season review, so the 10 games so far, the 7 Premier League games, the 2 Champions League games, and the Lincoln game. I reviewed all of that in a video yesterday. Well, it came out yesterday. So please go and show some support on that as well if you want to sort of have a little bit of a narrative and context of how the season's been so far from a broader perspective, with a lot different, with like the different tactical choices that have been made within that, some stats and all that good stuff. So let's get into it, because Forest, they've changed a little bit. Since Ange first joined, of course, we know how sort of solid they were in a compact low block under Nuno, really good at breaking out and hitting you on the break, not only through sort of long direct balls away, but also having those carriers. Elliot Anderson, Ola Aina was one that was brilliant at doing it from fullback, Morgan Gibbs-White, those players that can carry out from when they sort of won the ball back in that deep block in their own half. They could carry their team forward sort of on their own with 20, 30 yards of progressive carrying. Also, Alanga, a huge transition threat. So they had a lot of that going in their sort of favour. However, under Postecoglou, they are trying to implement sort of a new idea to be a little bit more expansive, be a little bit more on the high end in terms of pressing. If I give you a few quick stats, their pressing numbers this season, the PPDA is up to 11.8. They have 74 press sequences, so they're like one of the 7th or 8th, I think, in terms of how intense they press in the Premier League right now. So moved up a lot considering how they sort of played last season. And it's also just their on-ball ideas. I mean, this season, for comparison, especially when they're trying to build up, they have 4.19 passes per sequence. The only two teams with more passes per sequence are Chelsea and Manchester City. But they also have a sequence time of 11.35. So they're keeping the ball in that sort of first phase when in their build-up, those sequences are taking 11.23. Oh, no, sorry, 11.35. The only two teams doing more than that, having a longer sequence time at the minute, are Arsenal and Manchester City. So just a few sort of stats for context there on what Ange is really trying to bring to the forefront. Of course, he's without a win, but we're going to be talking about sort of the ideas. Now, instantly, what I want to talk about is what they sort of started out trying to implement, because things have changed over the last 2 games. Now, when he first joined and he's sort of first for Europa League games and he's trying to get to grips, I think he's been trying to bring in those quite elite level tactics, or in terms of tactics that you would use at the top end of the scale, in terms of having a 4-1-4-1 pressing scheme, looking to sort of go a little bit more man to man in sort of more frequently than your sort of lower sort of division teams, lower down the table teams. But also trying to win the ball back and then play and actually keep control of the game. So again, implementing things like those wide triangular rotations on the ball, slowing it down, trying to use the fullbacks inside central midfielders, number 8s, and wingers to create those rotations and occupy 3 different lanes, and then have that sort of 4-1-4-1 press or 4-4-2, as you can see here. However, another thing we know about Ange is the height of the line, and something that a lot of people sort of know with this Nottingham Forest defensive unit is they were really well suited to defending deep in their own box. They don't necessarily have the pace or even the experience playing in teams that do jump out of the press. Of course, Zinchenko's come from Arsenal, so that's a bit different. But he's another one that sort of doesn't have that same level of sort of physical base that you need to be able to jump out the press really aggressively, apply pressure, but then also fall off quickly as that ball is travelling over the top to play that high line and try and catch teams offside. Especially if you don't have pressure on the ball, which you can see here is something that happened against Burnley. And there's another example here where there's really no pressure on the ball. Now, in this case, the line has dropped off. And the reason I wanted to show this picture is because it sort of shows that 4-1-4-1 idea that we was talking about. And then eventually Hudson-Odoi would sort of drop off a little bit and almost form a 5-4-1 as well, which is something they are doing now from the start, which is what we're going to speak about, because it could be something that hampers Chelsea. But I did want to touch on the high line, because even within a 5-back, which they are now playing to spoil it, only for the last 2 games, so we don't know, maybe they switch back, but we have to cover it because it's sort of in the analysis section, and what, especially with Maresca, he would have watched these games and he would have seen this. The high line is somewhat staying, and they're trying to persist with it just in a different way in the back 5. So I do think that in this game there is areas for Chelsea to exploit with that ball over the top. So it's important to sort of take into the context when we talk about the tactics in a minute and what Chelsea could do to sort of go against this Forest side. It's important to take into account how it could sort of work for Chelsea and how they could use it to their advantage. So now if we skip on to the Newcastle game for Nottingham Forest, where they lost 2-0. In this game they played a back 5. Now what you have is you have Savona, who's playing as that right wing back. And essentially what would happen is they would still try to press at times man for man. And when they did, the shifts they would make, if we use this back 5 to sort of show things, is they would have sort of your front 3, if you like, here, in that sort of 5. You've then got the 2 midfielders here and here. But the interesting ones in this are Savona and then the wide centre back. I think it was Jer on this occasion. The reason they're intriguing is because these sort of man-to-man approaches from, say, I think Gibbs White was dropping on Jolinton here, so they've sort of been caught in that press. Wood here, sort of dropping onto Tonali as well, and then Ndoye there as well. The interesting factor is those roles are quite simple for these players in the 5. They will sort of go press, sort of man for man almost, if you're against a, let's say a back 3, maybe, like this. Well, let's put it in a back 4, because what it would be is the left wing would sort of press inside. This sort of would come from here to here to cover that ground. And then you'd have this guy on the right back as well, so Ndoye. What would happen is where a lot of teams we speak about those centre-backs jumping out to sort of occupy these pocket players when they're sort of stood behind those central midfielders. Instead, what you'd have with Forest in this sort of pressing scheme that they did, Savona would basically jump all the way onto Cucurella, or just, again, whoever it be. I think it's Dan Burn on this occasion. Yep. Would jump all the way forwards, which would then sort of lead this back line to shuffle across into a 4. So shuffle, 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 essentially like this, okay? And that would be how they look to press, and it would make it look like something of a 4-2-4 as such. And that is how they look to press man for man. But then when they fall off back into a block, now, again, this is something to show because you've got the aggression from one of the centre-backs of Forest pushing up onto Waltermada. It shows that at times they are willing to go man for man and still jump out of the press. So those balls in behind, especially if you have someone like João Pedro doing this role that Waltermada's doing, dropping in, it's important to have those runners going in beyond so that they can sort of threaten that back line with the spaces that will appear. So that's something else that I sort of wanted to point out about that. But then when they fall into, and again, this is to do with the high line. Again, if you look, sort of these players they're jumping out. They're a little bit jumpy at times, especially when the ball's sort of been cleared. They've obviously been told to get out. And I think sometimes they almost overstep, allowing these sort of gaps to appear through the lines. If we look at someone like Waltermada here, and if they can catch them on that sort of in between that trap, then I do think that there's some joy to be had there as well. But here you go. Once they drop into that shape, as you can see, it's a 5. You've got the 5 at the back. Then you've essentially got the 4. Now, again, Chris Wood's actually in here on this occasion with Ndoye higher up. But if I go to the next one, here you go. You've got the 5, the 4, and then the 1 of Chris Wood. So how can Chelsea sort of negotiate through this stubbornness of Forest, trying to play in a 5? Like I say, there's definitely factors in this game in terms of how quickly they step and how they try to transition from that low to mid block into a man-to-man press. I think it leave open quite a few areas to be exploited. So the first option is essentially to go with that same back four idea that we've been rolling with lately in terms of sort of a 4-3-3, having two central midfielders that can occupy the pockets higher up, but they can also drop in and create those sort of overloads alongside Casado. So say Fernandez drops in, Santos pushes a bit higher, and it almost creates that sort of 4-2-4 at times, which is perfect to sort of offset this Forest team if they do look to press man for man. Because as we said, Savona makes that press onto Cucurella or whoever plays right wing back. Then what it can leave is the centre back, whoever's playing in that sort of right centre back role, having to shift over to get over to this winger to sort of defend this wide area. So something Chelsea could definitely look to exploit within this, if they're playing this system, is getting the ball into someone like Garnacho as quickly as possible, whether that's through sort of a third man combination or whether Cucurella is able to sort of open up his body and clip it down the line. If Garnacho can get as many sort of 1v1s in this area against a centre back who's having to defend wider areas where he's maybe not as comfortable, that could be sort of one key area, especially if they're trying to transition into that press and you're trying to catch them as this jump is being made. This could be key. Now, in this sense, maybe it's even better to get Gittins on the pitch because, again, you've got more of a 1v1 specialist to sort of do that role. However, as I also mentioned, with someone like João Pedro, who can try to drag even another centre-back out by coming sort of as these players jump in the press as well, because, again, they're going to try and go man for man at this point. If João Pedro can sort of obtain this area of the pitch and he can drag one out with him, then it will exploit, not only give Garnacho chances to run in behind, but also Santos or whoever's in this area. So it could even be a game where you start Malo Gusto in midfield again, purely to exploit that area with runners. Now, yes, people won't like that because some people don't like Gusto and some people definitely won't like the idea of playing him out of position. But again, it's the game nowadays is so much more to do with roles and sort of qualities than it is to do with actual positions, that I think it sort of needs to be thought about in a different way. So that's definitely something that Chelsea could do, and I do think that we could sort of see this this idea again from Chelsea, and I'd like to sort of stay in a similar area to what we've been playing with. The issues with this, Badiashile is now out injured. So if you're going to play with a 2, essentially becoming a sort of 2-3 when these two players step up, and you essentially sort of form that shape, right? It's almost like a 2-3-2-3. You definitely don't want two right footers in this position because it will cut and restrict your angles to play forward, to sort of find these players in the pockets, to find Casado sort of in that that soft spot, because again, he's sort of the free man. If these two try and press man for man, can you get it into Casado? Having that ability to manipulate the ball is going to be key when they do try to press man for man. So I do think you need to make sure this is a left footer if you're going to play that 2-3 base. You don't want two rights. And Badiashile being out means that would fall to Hato, which means he would have to start as a left centre-back. Can he handle Chris Wood? Is a different question out of possession in terms of does it give them that option to go a little bit more direct over the press? That's something that Maresca will have to sort of ask himself in terms of how much he trusts Hato to play that game. I think Hato was good against Liverpool when he came on. But there's different games which cause for sort of different solutions and ideas that need to be sort of thought about. So that's the biggest reason when we're talking about this this team. And then, like I say, the Gittins or Garnacho choice. The reason I've got Esteban on the right and Neto actually not is because, again, the injuries, we've seen that Neto potentially injured, Fernandez potentially injured, Casado potentially injured, or not injured, but they didn't train. So they're sort of doubts for the game. I would be shocked if Casado didn't play. Maybe Fernandez doesn't play, so maybe you even see Santos and Gusto as a midfield too. Or again, you could say James, but like I say, I'm thinking about roles. So the reason I've put Gusto in there is to do a similar job as he did against Liverpool and sort of attack behind that last line, to attack behind João Pedro. So that's the reason that I've sort of said that for this. The other idea is to go sort of into this 3-1-6 that we've been playing in against back 5 teams. And this will be a really intriguing point for this game to see whether Maresca goes with this, despite the sort of problems that have occurred with these injuries, like I say, the big one being the left centre-back, or if he sticks with what he's sort of seen against back 5 teams. If we was to do this, I think a few things could be key. One, it means you can play those two right footers as your two centre backs. So if he doesn't trust Hato, maybe he goes for this instead and drops Kukurea into the back line to create a 3 on the ball. Now that can attract, not only you got that sort of one pressing in the front line, but again, you're trying to attract both those wingers forward to a press onto these players. If they don't, then these players have to be able to carry the ball. So you could even start a Chempong if you want on this side, Kukurea there too, as a left-footed one who can carry the ball forwards, and then look to sort of pin those wing backs with a winger here. And what I think would have to be, so what it would mean with Kukurea having to play in this left centre back is the right back is the one that has to either push up into an inverted position in one of these sort of number 10s, or has to sort of hold the width. So again, this could be another reason why Gusto is actually favoured to James in this game to play as that wide player, so that you can get Esteval in between the lines. These three players in between the lines, with Mark Guiu being the one to pin this back line and sort of continuously make runs in behind and continuously be a threat to, again, with this high line, can he continue to cause them problems where they either have to drop off and allow these three players to get on the ball, or he can catch them out in that high line and he can get in behind. And again, you've got other players who are willing to run with Gusto and Garnacho, who is going to run with him. And you can sort of overpower that backline 6v5. So that could be a big reason why we see this system instead, trying to sort of attract that press and sort of keep them in that 5-4-1 shape, which they have been doing sort of in a back five, and almost stopping them from going man-to-man with their fullbacks, with their wing-backs, and instead trying to take a little bit more control of the game and sort of go from there. A lot of people have been calling out for João Pedro to be in the pocket, sort of behind, in between the lines. I do think this is the way to do it. It would have to be with Mark Guiu, because I think that is how, and against the back five, it works. This is what I've been saying in sort of my other season reviews and my player reviews I did the other day, and player profile video. Against back fives, this makes a lot of sense to me because it gives Pedro the space. He doesn't have to do the carving of space for himself. He'll go, drag them back, and then Pedro has this space to manipulate. Against back fours, where if one steps out, they're going to leave a huge gap on one side of the pitch for someone like Fernandes or Garnacho to run into, then it makes a bit more sense for Pedro to play as that number 9 for me. But in this sort of game where you can have three central defenders, it makes sense to use Guiu in that sense. So I'm intrigued to see what Maresca does in this game, because I do think there's quite a few options you can go with. I think the injuries will play a big part. The build-up and how we sort of set up from the defence is going to be really, really interesting. And of course, even the midfield with Lavia somewhat available again now. Maybe he plays in the Champions League instead. Another thing to take into account is that João Pedro can't play against Ajax. So does he want to start Guiu against Forest and then also against Ajax? Maybe he uses Tyreek George against Ajax instead, which some people won't want to see either. So there's a lot of question marks around sort of how we're going to manage the squad in this run. And it's going to be really, really exciting to sort of go over each game, analyze them after the games have been played, and really come to grips with whether we're going to go back and forth between these two systems this season, depending on the opposition. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to seeing how Maresca sets this one up. So let me know any questions you have for this game in the comments down below. Hopefully this has helped you get prepared, ready for the game, early kickoff. I am actually quite nervous because I don't think Forest, especially in terms of individual sort of players, I don't think they're nearly as bad as it's made out to be. And I think that they could catch us out due to individual quality. I'm still somewhat confident because, again, I think that there's a lot of sort of aspects that we can tactically sort of unpick them with. But I'm just, yeah, it's a tricky one to navigate. And as long as we get a win, I will be happy. So let me know your score predictions down below. Like I say, comment, subscribe, like, hype, all that good stuff. And I'll see you guys after the game when we review the match in a few days' time. So up the Chelsea, and I'll see you in the next one.